Alright, so first things first, before we get into the actual subject of the video, I just want to ask, have you actually gone back and watched the SpongeBob movie recently? Because actually, that shit's like a perfect film. 10 out of 10. Because of that, I wanted to go back and actually check out the video game, and I swear I will do something that is not related to a movie at some point. But with that being said, let's begin. The SpongeBob movie game is kind of a weird one, and when I say that, I'm not even referring to the game itself. I don't know about you, but I feel I've always lumped this game together with the Battle for Bikini Bottom game, like it was some kind of sequel. It obviously isn't since it's a tie-in game with the movie, but the way these two games play just makes it hard to separate them. The game was obviously modeled after Battle for Bikini Bottom, which would make sense because both of these games run on the same engine, the engine being Renderware. Both of these titles released about a year apart from one another, so I imagine Heavy Iron Studios was just like, well, we have this SpongeBob game which is pretty good, so let's just use assets from it. And I mean, it was probably the best call, as I imagine with a movie tie-in game, the time frame they had to work on this was most likely pretty strict. So what did we end up with when this follow-up title came out? Well, let's get into it. The first level of the game is a super solid level 1. There's a very small amount of things happening, so it gives us plenty of room to mess around with the controls. One of the funny things about this game is the basic collectible you find in the stage. It's dumbbells, and I assume this is to showcase how manly SpongeBob and Patrick are when they carry all these weights around, as being manly was kind of a big focus of the movie. I mean, well, at least until the end, where SpongeBob decides that it's okay to be a kid. Here, while I'm talking about the movie, I just want to bring up that this game follows the plot pretty much beat for beat. This game came out almost a full month before the movie, which means if you were playing this game on release, you would literally be spoiling the entire film. On one hand, I do think it's kinda neat since this must mean that Heavy Iron Studios was directly working with Steven Hillenburg during this project to some extent. I mean, maybe not him directly, but they did most likely get some sort of script or storyboard. You see, a lot of movie games don't always follow the same plot. An example of this that comes to mind is the Pixar Cars game. In the movie, Lightning McQueen learns that winning isn't the most important thing and sacrifices his first place finish to help out this other car. In the game, he just ends up winning the race at the end. Fuck learning a lesson, I guess. But because this game follows the plot to a T, in a lot of levels the cutscenes they use to move the story forward seem like they come from a storyboard, as they clearly aren't from the actual film. Alrighty, back to the game. So when you complete levels, you collect Goofy Goober tokens. Think of these like the golden spatulas from the previous game, or if you haven't played that, the stars from the 3D Mario games are the next most obvious comparison. These aren't only given out at the end of levels though. If you go around and explore the level, you can find more in some little challenge areas. Now, some of these challenges range in difficulty from brain dead to what the fuck, I thought this was a children's game. Not all of these challenges are available from the start of the game though. As you collect more abilities, you need to return to previous levels to go collect the Goofy Goober tokens that you missed. And going backwards and replaying levels is, as far as I can tell, pretty required. Granted, as long as you found the location for the Goofy Goober token, when you warp back to the stage, you can just return straight to the location of the little side missions, so coming back isn't that bad. There might be some optimal path used in speedrunning where you don't have to revisit these stages, but let me tell you, I sure did. At the beginning of the game, there are 3 main types of challenges accessible to you, that being SpongeBob rolling around as ball missions, the Patrick platforming missions, and the combat trials. Now, there's only a handful of each of these in the game, and the first ones are simple enough, but by the time you get to the next ones, the difficulty spikes really hard. I mean, just look at this fan with these moving platforms. Maybe I'm just brain dead, but I swear this took me at least 10 attempts to get through. But regardless, if you have the patience to deal with these levels, then I think they're pretty fun. The Patrick platforming missions are pretty much the same, not as in gameplay obviously, but the first one is pretty easy and then they just slowly creep up and get harder and harder. Truth be told, my only real complaint about these levels is during one of the Patrick stages, the background becomes a crate that is constantly spinning and it's just visually obnoxious. But unless I missed one, I think this only happens in one of them. Then the final one is easily the worst. The combat trials. You have to clear 3 waves of enemies that get progressively longer. The combat in this game just isn't interesting enough to want to beat up baddies for this long of a time, and while you could technically fail these combat trials, extra health is always being placed on the edge of the arena, so dying during these would probably be harder than surviving. So in this game, there are 3 main types of stages. You have traditional platforming levels, ones where you drive the paddy wagon around, and the last one being where you just slide down hills. And as much as I hate to say it, not all of these are created equal. The best ones are for sure the platforming levels. These stages are honestly great and very reminiscent of the previous game. A lot of enemies you encounter in these levels are pretty much just reskinned to fit the theme of the next stage. Now there is plenty of enemy variety, so I don't really view this as a flaw with the game. As you progress in the game, both SpongeBob and Patrick will slowly start to unlock new abilities. Now, like plenty of other things in this game, most of these are reused from Battle for Bikini Bottom, with maybe one exception being Patrick's new cartwheel move. These extra abilities are what's used to gatekeep you from progressing through the game. You need to have a specific amount of Goofy Goober tokens to unlock each of these new abilities, and if you get to a stage where you don't have enough, well, at least Mindy will tell you that it's time to start backtracking. These new moves are only used during platforming stages, which makes sense. It would probably be pretty hard to bowl in a mobile hamburger. Now these new techniques consist of the Bash Move, Sponge Bowl, Sonic Wave Guitar for SpongeBob. Now, Patrick gets the Cartwheel, this ground pound, and the ability to lift and throw objects or enemies. Now, it admittedly took me a while to figure this out, but remember those dumbbells we've been collecting? Those, in fact, do have a purpose. If you collect enough of them, you get a point, which you can use to upgrade every ability you have or give SpongeBob and Patrick extra health. In my opinion, the most important one is the upgrade to your generic attack, because this allows you to send projectiles back at enemies. And later in this game, there's a lot of enemies that just kind of shoot projectiles at you. Most of these are just general damage upgrades with some small side effects, but the one I'm a little iffy on is SpongeBob's uppercut move. Once you upgrade this, SpongeBob will stick a spiked glove into the bad guy, but now it's also an explosive which has a chance to hit other enemies. You know, that sounds pretty good. The downside to this, however, is that it takes a little bit to actually explode, so it usually gives the enemy enough time to use an extra attack on you. All of the grounded stages are easily the best part about this game. I don't know what it is, but the final one, Welcome to Planktopolis, actually has some sections that are pretty difficult. Nothing impossible, obviously, but I personally wouldn't expect a child to just breathe through these sections. This game hit a point where I was just so dumbfounded by these levels and just fully embraced the difficulty in them. I really enjoy visiting these environments from the movie, but obviously some creative liberties had to be taken to extend the playtime. In multiple stages, you have to take out Plankton's mind control towers, or big TVs, to make sure he can't gain complete control. Famously in the movie, SpongeBob and Patrick don't know this is happening until they return to Bikini Bottom, and well, in this game, they at least act like they didn't know. Moving on to the hamburger car sections. These, for the most part, are just a little driving course. You aren't really trying to beat a time or anything, so you can just play them out. There's a couple examples of levels where you have to do a little bit more than drive, however. There's a stage where you have to find keys to get past this gate. If you don't find them all by the first lap, well, that's alright, since the more laps you complete, the more additional routes you unlock. I didn't really know this at first, so I was getting a little nervous when I made it past the first lap and hadn't even seen most of the keys. Sure enough though, if you look out for some alternate routes as the level goes on, all these keys are pretty easy to find. Now that we've collected all these keys, this quickly transitions into the first boss fight of the game. Pretty much every boss fight in this game is very simple, but there are very few of them, so when they show up, they're pretty exciting. The most standout one to me has to be Dennis the Bounty Hunter, and it's not really because of anything the boss itself was doing, but the environment you battle him in is just so goofy, and I love it. Please name another game where David Hasselhoff's hairy back is the level. Back to the paddy wagon, there's another stage which takes place in SpongeBob and Patrick's dream. You are in Goofy Goober Land, and you have to try to keep up with the Goofy Goober Peanut himself. I fucking hate this peanut bastard. This is the only drive stage where the game punishes you for exploring. If you take a different path from Goofy Goober, he quickly gets too far away and you lose. You can return to these stages later and do different trials, and when you do, the Peanut Man is no longer present. So if you wanted to explore the stage, that's a pretty good point to do it. Each driving level has a total of 4 Goofy Goober tokens to collect, and these tokens consist of completing a stage as normal, then doing it again, but now it's a time trial. Then you have to follow this specific path, and you have to travel through these rings, and then you have to finally play an even more strict time trial. Now, this wouldn't be that big of an issue, but some of these stages are pretty long, and if you mess it up, it starts over at the beginning. So there were for sure some points where I'd be in these stages for close to 30 minutes. Now, beyond the driving and platforming stages, there's one final type. I honestly don't know what I should actually call these, so we'll just go with sliding down a hill level. To be honest, for the most part, these are the same as the driving stages, except, as I'm sure you could guess, you aren't technically driving, just kind of going down a linear path that the game tells you. Now, there is one stage where it's not just a straightforward path, and that's Welcome to Shell City. Instead of a hill, you have to search for these targets that are laid out throughout the map, and you reach them by simply jumping between different colored wires. After slamming into every target, I think you're supposed to kinda steer yourself back to the starting point, but if you fall off, it saves your progress and just warps you to the beginning and shows you the correct path you now need to follow, so there's not much of a point to going back on your own. These levels also share the time trial / ring game, so there's not really a whole lot to talk about as far as these sections go. I do, however, enjoy the sceneries better in these stages. Now, I wouldn't say I dislike these parts of the game, they for sure are not the standouts. But to be honest, I think these sections are where I spent the most time, as these stages are the most obvious when it comes to going backwards to collect extra Goofy Goober tokens. As you start to unlock these new upgrades throughout the game, you can return to earlier levels and complete challenges that you couldn't quite do yet when you first found them. Most of these extra levels are pretty simple. A lot of the time it's just go back with Patrick and throw stuff to access new areas. Playing through these are perfectly fine. They just add some new jumping challenges to complete, so overall I enjoyed these. However, the last upgrade you unlock in the game is SpongeBob's Sonic Guitar. At first, I thought this could be some sort of DDR clone game, but nope, I was wrong. It's more fucking ring levels. At first, I thought this was fine because you get to see these stages from a new perspective, so it was honestly pretty neat. But when you're just doing these back to back, it starts to get stale after a while. I still opted to go for these levels because my other option was to play more car levels, and admittedly, I was a little paddy-wagoned out at this point. Some of these Sonic Guitar missions tend to overstay their welcome a little bit, and I'm not talking about the challenge as a whole. I mean, some of these go on for insanely long. I could get a couple of these first try, but eventually the rings started to appear out of my vision, so it just ended up feeling like a matter of trial and error. You know what though, even with all the downsides I talked about, I could probably forgive them just for the final boss of the game. Now at first it seems pretty standard, and well, it kind of is, but for the last phase of this boss, they start fucking playing Goofy Goober Rock, and to be honest, as silly as this song is, this shit's just hype. All you have to do is flip these tables around so when King Neptune starts to blast you, his attacks get sent back at himself. And after doing that, I think 9 times, it's done. SpongeBob learns it's okay to be a kid, even though as far as I'm aware, he still has to pay his own rent, and other than boating school, this little homie doesn't pursue a further education, so yes, I guess technically SpongeBob is a child. But he's not really living like one, he just acts like it. So in my eyes, SpongeBob, you are a man. You feed into the corporate greed just like the rest of us adults. But damn, at least you're having a killer time doing it. So, the SpongeBob video game actually surprised me in a lot of really positive ways. I went into this game assuming it was only gonna be fine, but I actually had a ton of fun with it. Now, the game does have its own flaws that do negatively affect the game, but even those flaws are still pretty fun. The main issue is that usually you just have to do the same type of mission back to back, and that's what makes it uninteresting and kind of stale. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of the game, and I'm gonna do something that I've never done. Might start putting numbers on things, but we'll see if I end up liking this. So SpongeBob SquarePants the movie, the game, it's like a 7 out of 10. It's really solid, and if you want to go back and take a look, I think it's worth it. I don't think the game really needs a remake like the other game. I'm gonna be honest, I think the Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated remake is just oversaturated as shit, and admittedly a little ugly. Just port it to new consoles. Just make it easy to play for new people. It doesn't have to be that flashy. We finally reached the end, and if you liked the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you don't know what to say, tell me your favorite SpongeBob episode. I remember plenty of them very fondly. But listen, if you take anything away from this video, it's that you should go back and watch the SpongeBob movie, okay? It's really fucking good.